Hey, what's up? So I just recorded an 18-minute video, and when I stopped it, I realized my microphone wasn't on. This one is going to be about the 2.0 Epic Clickies. I see a lot of questions and comments and forum posts about people wonder what epics are worth getting at high levels. And since I do stuff up to Omens of War and the 2.0s are Omens of War weapons, I figured I would just cover it all the way up so you guys can get a good idea of what is useful long term. So we got stuff tiered out here. We got the S tier, we got the A tier, the B tier, and I kind of mixed the C and D tier together. And along the bottom here, we got what levels they're good for, the level ranges. And over on the right, we got more useful stuff will be darker blue, and less useful stuff will be lighter blue. The reason I have Shaman, Bard, Shadow Knight, and Cleric in the S tier is because they're actually group effects, and those generally are going to be a lot better than just someone who's using a self effect. Next, we have the A tier, and they're pretty much just, for the most part, their damage increases. Other than the Monk one, isn't really, but we'll go over that when we get to it. B tier, we got Beast Lord, Paladin, Necro, and Warrior, and you can argue some of these can be mixed in with the C tier over here, but I think probably these are just slightly stronger than the ones in the bottom four. And then at the bottom four, we got Wizard, Magician, Druid, and Enchanter. So we'll go over all this and why I have stuff where I have it. So the first one is the Shaman. This everybody knows this is extremely strong. And we'll go over to the actual guide that I made over here. What the Shaman Epic does is increases the group's chance to melee critical hit by 65% and increases the group's critical hit damage by 110%. It's on a 3-minute cooldown. It's also got a little hot on it, which is good if you're in Omens of War era. But once you start getting more HP in little eras and other eras, 500 HP is really not going to do that much for you. So next up is the Bard Epic, and this is also a group effect. It will increase the spell direct damage and critical hit chance of your group by 12%. So single target direct damage and damage over time spells. Also increases the group melee accuracy by 140%. So this is good for whatever type of group that you have formed. Both casters and melee are really strong, and it's a 3-minute cooldown. After that, we have the Shadow Knight Epic. This is also a really good epic. This is best for melee-oriented groups. This will half of the melee damage that you deal to the mob will heal you. So if you do 100 melee damage to the mob in a melee swing, you're going to get a heal for 50. And you can imagine if you hit really hard, you're going to be getting healed really hard, and you can pretty much just become like a god while this is cooldown up. You can tank all kinds of stuff. And it's good all the way to 115, and it's just really good epic to have. You definitely want to do it. And the quest is actually fairly easy too, which is pretty cool. Up next is the Clerk Epic. You can argue this could maybe be an A tier instead of S tier, but I value it pretty high because healing is important. What this does is it's a secondary divine orb, basically. It's going to balance the HP of your group, and it's also going to heal everybody for 2300 within the group. So when you're in Omens of War, it's extremely strong. The 2300 heal is also really nice to have. Later in the game, when you start having 100 or 200,000 health, the little group heal isn't really, it's pretty minor. It's not really going to do much for you, but balancing the HP of your group is still really good. So that's the last thing I got in the S tier. Alright, so up next we have the A tier. We got Berserker, Rogue, Ranger, and Monk, and these are all self buffs. And you gotta put these in whatever order you want within here. They're all similar kind of in a way. But the first one is the Berserker Epic. This will increase your chance to critical strike or critical hit by 300%. That's huge. So that's really good all the way to 115. And also it increases your strength cap by 100, which is good in the earlier expansions, but later in the game it's going to matter less and less. So that one's really good. It's on a 3-minute cooldown. Next is the Rogue Epic, and this is also good all the way through 115 basically. This will increase the skill damage taken of the mob by 10%. It's actually like a debuff proc that you proc on the mob, but it'll also increase your chance to triple backstab by 45%. And since this is a debuff and it just says skill damage taken increased by 10%, it might just mean it might take increased melee damage from everybody by 10%. If so, this is extremely strong. After that, we have Ranger. And the Ranger Epic will increase your chance to critical hit with all skills and your accuracy by 170%. So again, it's just like another melee buff. It's a pretty decent one at that. It's 3-minute cooldown. So next we have the Monk Epic. I have this at the bottom of the A tier. You can maybe move it down wherever down here. It's a little bit subjective. But what it does is it will increase your max health by 25% or 10,000 HP, whichever is less. So the more health you have, the less effective this clicky is going to be. So if you're sitting at 200,000 health and you click this and it gives you an extra 10k, well, that's not really going to help you that much. But if you're sitting at like 20,000 health and this gives you an extra 5k, that's pretty big. So yeah, it gets worse over time, and but since it maxes out at 10k, it does make it pretty useful for at least a little while. But maybe once you get into like the 90, 95, 100 range, the use of this is pretty limited. And it also has a direct damage and stun proc on it. So that will hold pretty good aggro at some of these earlier stages. But again, that doesn't scale up well either, so eventually the aggro on that is just not as good. So let's talk about the Beastlord Epic first, the top of tier B. I have this here. It could possibly be lower down the list, but let's talk about what it does. It's a pet buff that lasts 20 minutes, and it's going to increase his health by 1,000 health, which is really good, especially like in Omens of War. An extra 1,000 health is pretty decent. And here's why I have it fairly high. It says 12% increased chance to avoid melee. Now, I don't know how that's calculated. Does that mean, you know, it's like 12% on top of everything? Is it like calculated in some way to where later in the game it's not as good? I don't know. Maybe a Beastlord can post in the comment on that one, how well that one scales up. But and it also will give it 8% chance to a double attack, and it also gives it a 200 point direct damage proc as well. So I would get this anyway, even at 115. To me, it just seems like a good buff in general to have. Yeah, so we got the Beastlord there at the B tier. The Paladin one, this is real situational. I have it, you can use it all the way to 115, like its effect works the same all the way scaled up, but it's situational. So what it does is it will increase the heals you receive by 40%. It also has a direct damage proc on it, which, you know, over time, the direct damage proc isn't going to be as good as it is at level 70. But increased heal received by 40% can be really good, and it can keep you alive, especially if like maybe using like a Merc to heal you, and Mercs is simply not healing for enough. When you click this, it's going to heal you for a lot more. So yeah, or if you're getting spiked like extremely hard in damage, and people just can't keep you up anyway, well, getting 40% more heals isn't really going to help you. But yeah, so it's situational, and this is a decent clicky, so I would say it's worth getting. You're going to have probably run into a situation where you need it. The Necromancer one is extremely interesting. So I have it in the B tier because it's really good at level 70, level 75, and level 80, but after that it starts to fade out because they nerfed it last year. And the thing about this one is the focus is really what we're looking at here. The focus is the more important part. It does have a clicky, which will summon a pet that's going to like give life to your group. So, you know, it's good, decent at level 70. After that, the heal is going to be really low, and over time, that part's not going to be as useful. But the focus on this is increased chance to critical strike on your dots by 8%, which is humongous. And it used to be good all the way until the max level cap, whatever it was. But last year they nerfed it, so it's going to decay on spells over level 80 now. So since it's in the, we're not using it really for the clicky here. We're mostly interested in the focus. You're actually going to have to wear this one in your primary. And you can wear it in there all the way up until level 80. But after that, you can decide whether it's worth using for you up to level 85. It's kind of just, it's going to have less effectiveness, but if you still want to wear it, it will add something. But after that, it's just basically going to do nothing at all. So I got it down here in the B tier, just because it fades out so fast and it's so strong right away. Next, we got the Warrior Epic, and this could maybe go in the C or D tier. You know, it's situationally good, so it's tough. So I have it here in the B tier, but what it does is it increases the HP of your group by 800, which is pretty nice. And if you're in Omens of War era, that's really good. But since it's just a static 800, it doesn't scale up or anything. The more health you have, the less effective this is essentially going to be. So it kind of just like gets less and less effective over time. But it has a secondary effect where it gives you increased chance to resist spells by 20%. And I don't think the resist spell part is for your group. I could be wrong, but if you look at the wording on here, it says places the protection of blah blah blah, increases your group hit points and providing you with a chance to ignore the effects of detrimental spells. So if you're looking to resist some spells, you can use this all the way up to 115. It's a good clicky for that. But most of the time when you're not looking to resist spells too often, so it's just situational. But it's worth getting for that alone if you're really high level. Lastly, we have the C tier and the D tier. I kind of just have them mixed together. Call it whatever you want. The first one is the Wizard Epic, and this will decrease the chance for your spells to resist from your group by between 1% and 50%. So it can be, I think it just RNGs somewhere in between there. So there's a chance the effect won't work at all, or barely, I should say barely work. And it only has 8 charges, but it lands on your whole group, so that's kind of cool. It's kind of like there's an AA they have called like Arcanum something that also reduces spell resist, so it's kind of similar to that effect. But yeah, it's only gonna last 8 spells and it's on a 3-minute cooldown. So I kind of have it here at the bottom. You don't have to get it. It'll have like some minor uses, probably like on a raid or somewhere where a mob's resisting a lot. But yeah, so I just kind of have it in the middle of the road down here all the way up to 115. Moving on to the Magician Epic. I have this a lot lower than the Beastlord one, and let's go over why here. It is also a 20-minute buff, just like the Beastlord Epic is. It gives 1000 HP, just like the Beastlord Epic. However, here's the big difference. The Beastlord Epic is 12% melee avoidance, whereas the Magician Epic is gives some mana and HP regen to your pet. So I don't know why they thought this would be like useful for your pet. Maybe if you have a fire pet, it might be a little bit useful, but it doesn't compare with melee avoidance at all. And it also has 200 point direct damage and proc and stun. And that's good to about level 75. After that, it's going to be less effective as well. So I have that lower down here. It's just not straight up not as good as the Beastlord one. But like I said earlier, the Beastlord one may be a little bit lower in the chart too, just depending on how well that melee avoidance scales. Lastly, second to last, we have the Druid Epic. And this is actually really good at level 70 era. And it's also good at level 75. It will increase the target spell damage taken by up to 50%. And I think it lasts 5 ticks, so I think it lasts 30 seconds by default. And it's a debuff that goes on the mob, so it'll work for everybody. So that's extremely strong. Now, the reason that it fades out is because it decays on spells over level 75. So it's going to be really good clicky for level 70 and level 75, but once you hit 76 and plus, it's going to start decaying out. And probably by the time you're like 80 or 81, you're not going to hardly see any benefit of it at all. So yeah, that's why I kind of have it here at the bottom. It's good for a while and then just craps out. Lastly, we have the Enchanter Epic. And this is pretty good for level 70. It's not the best thing in the world. And level 75, it's okay. And then after that, it starts to just turn into complete crap. And again, it's one of those clickies that have like static numbers assigned to them. It doesn't scale up. So that's why it sucks after a while. It'll give you an 1800 point rune. And it lowers your hate by 900 when you cast it. So, you know, 1800 point rune is really good in Omens of War when you have, you know, 10 or 11 or 12,000 health or somewhere in that ballpark. But as you get more health, the 1800 point rune means less and less, and eventually it's barely worth casting at all when the mob's hitting you for like 20,000 a hit. And it also has a negative 900 hate component. Same thing, 900 hate is pretty okay in Omens of War, but as you go on later expansions, 900 hate doesn't mean crap. So that's pretty much everything. Hopefully this will at least help you understand what each effect does and whether you think it's worth it for you to get your epic. So I hope this is helpful. Please like it if it was, and please subscribe. All right, thanks guys.